Hey, boys and girls. Welcome to another episode of The Naked Bigfoot Speaks. Yeah, catchy title, isn't it? Before we get started with tonight, I want to let everybody know, give my usual disclaimer, that all views are exclusively those of the Naked Bigfoots. I am not here to change your mind or persuade you or, make your children follow the legions of darkness and scream Hail Satan at every Thanksgiving dinner that you have. I am here to educate, inform, and entertain. And with that, if you have any small children in the room who are not used to profanities, such as fuck, shit, damn, cock, motherfucker, things like that. Yeah, I said those all in the same line. Um, then I strongly advise you to get them out of the room now. If you're offended by such words, I advise you to either um, listen to me later with headphones on your finger over the mute button, because you can pretty much guarantee at some point I'm going to be dropping the F bomb. You can usually tell when I'm going to, too. Also, I want to add that, um, as you can probably tell, I don't waste time in doing, and I don't consider it a waste of time. I just don't do it. I don't do fancy intros, special effects, or I keep everything clean and simple. Me and you, face to face. If you guys like the format in which I hold these discussions, please let me know. If you think of any improvements, please let me know. Just let me know in the comments, or you can DM me through Twitter or make a comment on Twitter with me using hashtag Mike the Naked Bigfoot or just the Naked Bigfoot. I will definitely pick up on that. I think that's it for the beginning business. So let's get to the heart of the matter tonight. Again, I want to thank everybody who's coming on tonight and listening to me again. I know I delayed several of my broadcasts this week, both for health reasons and for other reasons. But I'm feeling better. I just have a splitting ass headache. That's all. But I'll medicate myself right after this. Tonight, I'm going to be discussing the Skin-Walker, the legends and tales of the Skin-Walker, um, and more importantly, the origins, the I need to find a way to test this, because I'm going to be talking about two things, uh, which they're similar but vastly different. As I go into the deeper into the conversation, you'll find out just how different they are. One is the Skinwalker that you see that's become YouTube clickbait, and everybody that has a paranormal channel or television series or publication always has they always do a segment or an episode or two on the Skinwalkers. They know people are fascinated by the Skinwalker, the tales of the Skinwalker, and legends of the Skinwalker. Hopefully, I'll be able to pull back the veil on exactly what that is, and what it isn't tonight. So this is not clickbait. This is an honest discussion of what it actually is. And also the Naagloshii. The Naagloshii is the Dene. And I know I've got some folks that are on here tonight that are from the Midwest, Arizona to be more specific, who may recognize the word Dene. But if you do not, for those who do not, Dene means the people in Navajo. It is what the Navajo call themselves. Yeah, it's gonna be one of those nights, dude. The Dene are what the Navajo call themselves. That's what it's the Navajo word for what we call the Navajo. Dene means people. So I'll be using Dene more than Navajo tonight when I'm discussing this, because the Skinwalker is an intimate part, and the Naagloshii and the Skinwalker are integral parts of the Dene culture and belief system. But like I said in the brief blurb about tonight's episode, what makes, one, a remember the Naagloshii is the proper name for a skinwalker, and a skinwalker is what it's become over the years. But they are two similar but distinct entities as well. But I'm jumping ahead. I'm jumping ahead. I'm jumping ahead. So let me pause for a second and get back on track, because I actually have something planned, believe it or not. Okay. Let's start off with a little introduction. Every group of people throughout the world, whether every tribe of people, every culture, every race, every religion, people of grouped creeds, every nation. Within these groups of people throughout the world, there are things that have happened in their history as a people that has brought great shame to their people, to their culture, to their beliefs, to their race, to their religion. Um, and none so is more tragic than when you start talking about the Diné or the Navajo people. What do I mean by that? Okay, you probably well know. You can either look it up or you can watch any of the documentaries or any of the semi-documentaries that you see on YouTube or the Travel Channel. That the Navajo people, more importantly, the Navajo medicine men, they do not discuss the Naagloshii or the Skinwalker very much at all. They're responsible, actually, for a great many of the myths that surround the Naagloshii and the Skinwalker, which are they have fomented a bit of disinformation to scare people away from digging further into the legends and stories of the Skinwalker and the Naagloshii, and learning the terrible cultural truth behind the Naagloshii. But how, pray tell, did your friendly neighborhood naked Bigfoot was able to find out? And this, what I'm going to be telling you tonight, is the God's honest truth, as it was told to me by a series of medicine chiefs back in 2007, I do believe, if I'm getting that correct. And I spent some time again in the Midwest. And it was at a time in which I was offering my services to the religious and paranormal communities around the United States. But I was not offering them for money. I was offering them for stories. At the time, I was collecting information mainly for myself, my own benefit, the information about different stories and legends of different cultures and belief systems here in the United States. And previously, I'd spent time abroad in both South America and throughout the Caribbean, and countless little Polynesian islands, including, of course, Hawaii, Fiji, and the Philippines. God, when I start giving you guys the stories I collected in the Philippines, it'll blow your mind. Oh, the Philippines has got some crazy supernatural shit that happens there. But that's neither here nor there. I was asked, it's not illegal, so I can say it, so I shouldn't pause on it. At the time, I was growing a number of hallucinogenic substances and herbs and such. It wasn't anything, and it wasn't an opioid. Trust me, it was various herbs that a lot of the tribal medicine chiefs did not have access to. And they heard by word of mouth that I had access to it, and I had several trunks full of it, as a matter of fact. And I would peddle my wares. Again, I was not peddling them for money. I would either exchange them for goods or I'd exchange them for stories. And at the time, which is weird, just to let you know, it's really, really weird to go on a reservation. I mean, to actually go deep onto a reservation, to be invited onto a reservation. Um, Peyote was one of them, as a matter of fact. I still grow peyote. um, I only grow it, because we're an agricultural, our farm, and we run an agricultural business. I have the USDA that always comes on the farm to do inspections every so often. So I have permits to grow it, not for medicinal use, but for as a curiosity. Wink. Um, but peyote was one of them. Another one was a series of other mushrooms, as well as a few Mexican herbs and spices. But you get me distracted on the drug trade. Um, it's nothing like being on a reservation and you're the only you're the only person who is non-Indian, and I will be saying Indian and Native American. I will not be saying indigenous people, okay? I have not met any Native Americans or Indians who call themselves indigenous people unless they live in Washington, D.C. Um, so if you're offended by that, get over it. It's an odd feeling being the only person out there. Um, but they did not look at me, the families and the people who live there, they didn't look at me with hostility. They looked at me with curiosity because they'd already heard that I was coming on and what I was bringing to everybody at the time. So I was accepted for the duration of the time that I spent there. And then we decided to haggle the price over my wares at the time. And we decided on stories. And the medicine chiefs were going down their stories, and I had heard all of the ones that they had to say. But I had already had heard of outside of the reservation about the Skinwalker. And I said, "What can you tell me about that? If looks could kill." When I said that, I thought I was looking for the exit because I could feel there were 15 people in the room with me, and I could feel um, it wasn't anger and it wasn't exactly hostility. It was a how dare you bring that up. Um, they came in there. Um, and back in those days, much younger than I am now. Um, I didn't have the ability to keep my mouth shut, especially when I got nervous, and I was feeling right nervous at the time. So I repeated my request. What can you tell me about about the a skinwalker? And they actually the elders, I'm gonna call them the elders, including the medicine chief, they stepped away into a corner, and it's for about 15, 20 minutes. They were talking amongst themselves. I couldn't hear them, but I was getting stared at really hard by everybody else in the room. Um, and they came back to tell me they agreed to my terms, and they would tell me, and this is a quote, this is a direct quote, and it bothers me even now today when I say what they said to me. It was one of the most profound things I've ever heard. We're going to tell you the story of our shame. And so, from what I'm going to tell you tonight, um, the story tonight and the discussion tonight is considered it's not taboo, but it's a cultural shame. It's something they're all ashamed of. But that every Dene that is born, or they inherited the shame of their ancestors, or what bringing about the Skinwalker, and they considered a their own private curse for what they've done. Couldn't have been more ambiguous, could I? Well, let me clear that up. The Naagloshii and the Skinwalker, like I said earlier, are actually, I think of them as a rose. Um, the flower, think of it as a rose. The flower itself would be the Naagloshii, and the thorns along the stem would be the Skinwalker. They're all part of the same plant, but one is beautiful and the other one will freaking make you bleed. Um, but what is a Naagloshii? Now, the Naagloshii is spelled in a cover multiple different ways, because before the Navajo people, the Navajo people, had the written word, they developed the written word. They passed everything down through an oral tradition. So when the concept of actual letters um, to express the words that were passed along were used, the spelling would change. Sometimes it have more vowels. Some it has less vowels and more consonants. But essentially, it's pronounced the same way. It just looks different, but when you're pronouncing it, you pronounce it the exact same way. The Naagloshii was and is a divine messenger from the spirits and the ancestors of the Dene people. They would act. Um, they are responsible for teaching the cultural beliefs and the life skills to the first of the Dene people. Um, they were sent by, of course, I'll say it in quotation marks, their gods and their higher spirits. They acted as the in between them. When a medicine chief wanted to question answered, or wanted help, or requested help, they would very rarely speak to the greater spirit in question. Instead, they would speak to the in-between person, which was the Naagloshii. So the Naagloshii, as the Dene people developed and began to be fruitful and multiply and become a nation of people, as they developed further and further along, the Naagloshii spent more and more time on the earthly plane and not the spiritual plane. On the earthly plane, teaching and instructing a chosen people, which of course were the Dene. And over the centuries, the Naagloshii, they began to develop mortal tastes. They began to develop a taste for food, a taste for recreation, and more importantly, uh, a taste for sex. Now, let me back up for a second. A Naagloshii would never, it was a shapeshifter. They were, as with many other Indian and Native American spirits, they could assume other forms. But the Naagloshii had a certain set of limitations placed upon them by the gods and the spirits that created them. They could never exactly, like if they would appear as a cougar, or they would appear as a bear in front of the medicine chief, they would be the approximation of a bear or a cougar. It could be a bear, but it would have instead of having looking completely like a bear, it would have the legs or maybe the horns of an antelope, or a deer, or if it appeared before them as a rabbit, it would have the facial it would look like a rabbit in body, but have the facial features of a gosh, any large cougar or mountain lion. They could only approximate the forms in which they assumed, because if they were able to completely transform into these other forms, it was considered an abomination. They would be considered an abomination against the natural way of things, because only a rabbit can be a rabbit. Um, Only a cougar can be a cougar. Only a bear can be a bear. Only a moose can be a moose. Only a butterfly can be a butterfly. Naagloshii, if it was to assume us, remember I'm saying assume these forms, it could not be, and I'm using that with a capital B and a capital E, as in assuming the spirit, just not the likeness of the animal. There are cultures that have spirits and have followers who can actually assume it and become these critters, but the Naagloshii were not allowed to do it. That was a limitation placed upon them. But to be able to, the one form they were ever forbidden to assume by the gods, by their spirits, by their bosses, the one form they were never allowed to assume, which was the most sacred form of all, was that of a member of the Dene tribe, that of a human being. They were never allowed to try to assume the form of a human being. But these Naagloshii, which had spent so much time amongst the humans and began to develop the same tastes and became a little less perfect. Remember, these are divine beings. These are divine beings. These are creatures that are of spirit. They don't possess a spirit. They are spirits. But like I said, they're developing taste because humanity has rubbed off on them, so to speak. So they break the greatest rule that's ever put before them. They assume, they approximate the form of a human being in which to mate with members of tribes that they were working with. I'll let that sink in for a minute. And I'm not going to draw, and what I'm about to say, I'm not going to draw the obvious correlations between that and the Christian mythos about angels and demons procreating with human beings upon the earth. That's a story for another time. That'll be a discussion or a debate for another day. But once they did break this ultimate taboo, and the Naagloshii were no longer allowed to enter the realm of the spirit anymore, they were cast out. They had to exist in a great desert between lands, between the spirit world in which they were made, in which they called home, and the mortal world in which they transgressed upon and broke their fundamental rule. They went from being teachers to acting inappropriately with their pupils. So the Naagloshii became monsters. They became chimeras. When one would look upon a Naagloshii, it would one that was cast out for what it did. They were no longer allowed to keep just one form when they materialized before someone or when they interacted on the mortal world from this limbo in which they had to return to. They had the features of all animals and none at the same time. And their eyes went from silver to yellow. The silver being the purest form of their spirit, to yellow meaning that they had fallen from grace. So you could always tell the difference, no matter what form they assumed or what forms they were approximating. Their yellow eyes always gave them away as one of the fallen. So if a member of the Dene was canny enough to pick up on that, they were able to avoid a very unfortunate situation. Because these creatures went quite mad once they realized that they were still divine spirits, but they were no longer allowed to return to the realm of the divine. They were forced to live on this deserty limbo. And then react violently, whom they blamed the Dene people for corrupting them. When it was them, they are the ones that made the choice. They are the ones that made the choice to fall. They blamed the Dene people. And they chose to punish the Dene people by you know, becoming a spiritual plague upon their people. Now, I did say they did procreate with. Let me pause for a second. Does anybody have any questions? Any comments? Because it's about to get a little bit more real. Okay. If you had a question, it hasn't popped it yet, but if it pops up, I'll pause and read it out loud and see if I can answer it. Okay. The fallen Naagloshii blame the Dene for their predicament. They never had wisdom and insight enough to look within themselves and see that they had developed a sense of arrogance that was usually found within a mortal human, a mortal being. But now they had arrogance, but on a divine level. um, but they had been carnally, they were having sex with human beings. They would approximate a female or approximate a male. Um, and every time that they did have intercourse with a human being, and I'm going to use this with quotation marks, a child would be born. Uh, and either it'd be born from the Naagloshii, if assumed a female, it would go through the mortal pains of giving birth, which drove it further mad. It made it more resentful of the Ney people. Or that the human female that made it with a Naagloshii gave birth, but 9 times out of 10, the female that gave birth to a child would die. Die in childbirth more often than not. Um, and what were these children called, you may ask? Hmm. Well, they were eventually called skinwalkers. Yeah, that's where the term skinwalker comes from. Because uh, the child could be born either male or female, but because the child was born as a scion, that's Scion, not the car, but the issue of a divine being, they became the mortal version of that divine being, a scion. And they were called a skinwalker. Why were they called a skinwalker? Just because they were born as a male or a female, well, they inherited the ability to shift between forms. Just not between forms as well. They could shift between sexes as well. So a male could become female and a female could become male. Um, I'm going to do a later show about the tale of the deer woman, which is another story that I picked up in my travels of the deer woman. And the deer woman was always it. I assumed that, and once I heard all of this, and learned about the deer woman, that the deer woman was a child, a mortal child of the Naagloshii, and a human being. But you'll have to look forward to that story. Tale of Deer Woman. That's actually pretty cool. It's pretty damn bloody too. Um, but these children were born again. They weren't. They were born with a divine spark without being divine. Um, the Naagloshii being a divine spirit, and the Skinwalker just having a spirit of the divine within it. And that spirit of the divine that was in it, a splinter, a spirit, a spark, a candle of the divine within it, um, gave it the ability to shift between forms. But much like the limitations that were placed upon its parent, its divine parent, the Naagloshii, the Skinwalker is not allowed to, and is not able to, assume a complete form of something. Oh, And they also inherited their parents' yellow eyes as well. They have perpetual jaundice, apparently. But it's one way of spotting them too, is looking at the eyes, especially through a camera. And nowadays, digitally, you'll be able to see the yellow of their eyes and know what they are. They were only able to approximate other animals in other forms. It always would be a mix of a mortal human form mixed with an animal's form. It would never be something that'd be a complete wolf or a complete coyote. It would be a blending of their what they looked like when they were born and the form that they were assuming. And usually the form, excuse me, I gotta get comfortable in this what I'm like sitting in. It's hot as hell in here too. Pardon? Gotta that sound you hear me be operating. I have a just a quick sidebar. I have a remote control to every single thing in this room. So lights, heating, fan, you name it. It's pretty cool sitting in bed with a remote control to absolutely everything. Um, these children were not thought of as monsters. In the beginning, the Dene, they actually worshipped these children in a sense. They thought they were touched by the gods in a good way. Um, Little did they understand at the time when these children were just being born is that these scions, these children, these skinwalkers, as they matured, and they matured at an extremely fast rate. They'd go from being a newborn to a toddler in a matter of days, and from a toddler to an adult in a matter of weeks. Which was again another, another reason why. I mean, another indication of their unnatural conception. They were originally. That's a good question. Have I ever seen a skinwalker? Um, I think I have, and I was saving that to the very end of the story. Um, so be patient with me, and I'll let you know what I saw. Hey, Christine, good to see you there. Um, they were they were looked at as because remember the medicine chiefs of every tribe and within the nation they looked upon the as the Naagloshii as they knew that they could tell the ones that had fallen versus the ones that were still operating within the boundaries and rules given to them by the greater spirits in the next life into the next world. But they still the Naagloshii that had fallen. They still gave them great reverence and respect. And to the children that at the time, for a time, they gave the same reverence and respect to the children um, that came from these fallen Naagloshii. And the name Skinwalker didn't get attached to much later. Um, Crap, sorry. I zoned there for a second. The Skinwalker was usually given when it matured. It was allowed to become a medicine chief or work with close hand in hands or actually be a medicine man or work with the medicine chief of the tribe. So again, being born of the divine, they were of course born with the ability to shapeshift and be able to communicate with the next world as well and be able to communicate with their parents as well very easily, easier than the medicine chiefs were able to do it because of their nature. Medicine chiefs being completely mortal, um, and of course the skinwalker having to touch a divine inside of a mortal shell. The only thing they didn't really consider until it was too late is that what happens when someone is born um, mortal a human, um, with a frail mind, with a mortal mind, and then you're born with the spark of a something that is greater than you, that of a something from the divine within you. Usually those two things don't mesh. And what happened, and always happened 100% of the time, is that the Skinwalker was driven insane, trying to reconcile its dual nature. Not quite divine, entirely mortal. Um, and trying to find a healthy medium between these two completely different halves of this being. They went insane. Um, and they were dangerous, not only to their fellow tribesmen, but to other members of other tribes that they interacted with. They were dangerous to the wildlife and to the natural world. They had no regards. They had no appreciation of life, whether it be human life, animal life, or vegetable life. Um, they abhorred nature. If you wanted to, I mean, imagine this: if you were a skinwalker and you saw a bear and you wished to have the strength and to be a bear, a great bear, but when you shifted, you became this amalgamation of a mortal human being and a bear, this imperfect form. You would begin to resent these creatures. You begin to resent the bear, and you would become envious of the bear. You'd become envious of the people that you were not able to approximate, because the skinwalker, of course, was born not only being able to shift between forms of, male and female gender forms, uh, they were able to and shift into the approximation of other animals. Um, oh shit, sorry, my singular is catching up to me. Um, not only was the skinwalker, I mean, of course, this envy and this went from envy to just outright hatred, because what you can't have, and this is true for everybody, what you can't have, you destroy. And they became very destructive and very angry creatures. They began to shed and in this insanity, and they shed their sanity and their humanity at the same time. Now, this was the first couple of generations of the that were born. Now, remember, a skinwalker, um, the skinwalker could, breed and could mate with human beings, and what would be born between that would be another skinwalker. It would be a lesser form of its parent. Um, it would have less of the spark of divine within it, but still be able to do many of the great and terrible things that its parent could do. But with every generation that was born, they became the spark of divine became a little less and a little less within them. Also, they were born with even less humanity within them and less sanity within them. A little silence of the lambs. Well, it's true. And it's true when it comes to the skinwalkers in general. Um, oh, and I meant to tell you that once the Naagloshii had absolutely nothing to do with their children, or their grandchildren, or their great grandchildren. Once they mated, either they gave birth or the human female would give birth. Um, they considered their job done. They moved along to continue to be fruitful and multiply continuously. Um, they did not interact with their children very often, and and as the stories went, when the skinwalker interacted with an Naagloshii, it usually didn't go well at all. Um, the skinwalker was a reminder to the Naagloshii of the sins that they had committed, to the terrible things that they did, their fall from grace, so to speak. They were a brutal reminder of it, and they didn't care for that whatsoever. Let's skip ahead a few hundred years, and by this time, the skinwalkers that were continually being born, because of course the Dene, the Navajo tribes, like I said earlier, they didn't worship, but they held in high regards and reverence the skinwalkers that were born that way, that were born from the Naagloshii. So they did nothing to stand in the way of the skinwalker, and they didn't stand in the you to quote another movie. The only time you're ever hurt is when you stand in hell's way. And they never stood in hell's way. They actually encouraged, and they would, there were chiefs of the various tribes that would marry their children off to a skinwalker in order to have a skinwalker born within their tribe. These skinwalkers, again, they learned the Dene medicine ways by working with or becoming a medicine chief. But their ways were corrupt ways. They weren't part of the Dene path. So usually the tribes that allowed a skinwalker to lead them spiritually, those tribes usually died out or were destroyed quickly and efficiently. Um, Usually from quote unquote the wrath of the spirits and the wrath of the gods would come down upon them, and they would be wiped off the face of the planet. Uh, but that still didn't discourage um, the skinwalkers to seek out to have more children, and chiefs of other tribes to continue to have children. So they perpetuated the sin of the Naagloshii through the skinwalker. The Dene people did. So you might begin to understand why they don't discuss, the Navajo tribes won't even discuss or say aloud in front of strangers a skinwalker, because it's shameful. Let me put it in a really crude and blunt way. Um, that'd probably make a little bit difference. Most people who are familiar with any of the V.C. Andrews books, it usually follows families that are born of incest. Um, you have to think of it that way. But the families never spoke of these great and terrible secrets in front of strangers. Well, the Dene, the Navajo are the same way. They will not discuss in any sort of way in front of strangers. Uh, the Skinwalker, the origins of the Skinwalker, because that's a great shame that their ancestors committed in allowing this to come about. Because once you let the genie out of the bottle, you can't get it back in the bottle so easy. And their ancestors, for a time, really let that genie get out of control. You know, they considered um, they considered the Skinwalker the ultimate, and of Oppenheimer's deadly little toy. That was their nuclear weapon, was the Skinwalker, and they reveled in that power. But let's flash forward to today, because the Skinwalker of today is not alike the Skinwalker of several hundred years ago, or even 100 years ago. God's not even 10 years ago. They are still being born. They're being born lesser to what the Skinwalker ancestors were. 'Cause remember, the first Skinwalkers that were born were the strongest and the powerfulest of them all, and they continued to dilute their blood and their spark of divinity by continuing to marry into the mortal world and marry mortals and have more children. And that spark of divinity was slowly, but surely, diluted into what you have today. Um, and this comes again with the Navajo, the Dene people, when to be able to cover up their shame. They refer to the skin. They let the legend of they created, they molded the legend of the Skinwalker into something more palatable because you've all heard um, on every bit of literature that you read, and every little thing you see on television or read or see on YouTube that do anything about skinwalkers is that the Native Americans won't speak of a skinwalker because it may attract their attention and they may come to you. Well, you know why they say that? Because they don't want you to. They want to scare your ass enough to where you won't ask any more questions. You won't start digging into the truth. I got lucky because I had something they needed really bad, and to them, the story that they told me of how the Skinwalker came about was gold bars to them. They were handing me giant golden ingots of information that they have shared with very, very few people, much outside of the tribe, much less um, bald white guys like myself. Um, but as with all, when I deal with any other culture besides my own, I always approach it with reverence and respect, and I listen and I'm very attentive, and and I ask respectful questions, and they looked upon me fondly for doing that, knowing that if I shared the story, that I would share it truthfully and honestly. Um, but again, let's talk about the modern skinwalker. Now, this story was told, and you have to remember, Native American stories. Again, stories are history to a lot of cultures, including the Native Americans and most assuredly the Dene, the Navajo people. Stories are history, their personal history, and it took multiple days for the story to be told to me. Um, Trust me, it had, unlike tonight, it had a lot of metaphors in it. And I was not allowed to write it down or record it. So, over the course of 3 days, I believe 3 days, if I'm correct, the story was told to me. And every time I went home, well, went to my motel room outside the reservation, I would sit down and write down as much as I could remember from the conversation I had during the day, including I would jot in the corners of my journal, questions that I had that I could ask him the very next day. Because I know after they finished telling me the story, I would only be able to ask them a few more questions before they showed my sorry ass the door and told me to leave. Take my bag of tricks with me and leave. With that said, on the third day when the sun was going down and I was leaving there with my information, going home to do it, I saw on the road as I was driving, it seemed like I was the only fucking person on the road at the time. And for those of you who have never been to the American Midwest or American West and places like Arizona, Texas, and New Mexico, there are huge tracts of land between towns, between some of these reservations, that at night it is pitch black. There is nothing around you. It's the darkest of nights when you're driving on these roads, especially if you're driving on some of the back roads. There's nothing there at all but you. And it can be intimidating. It can be quite terrifying actually too when you're driving on these roads and you're driving by yourself. And my car, you know what those roads are like at night. They're dark. It's black. There's no natural or electrical source of illumination around you at all, especially if it's cloudy. It's really terrifying. I think it's even more scary when there's actually stars out. It just feels like the world is swallowing you up when you're on these roads, that you're going down the throat of some great beast. Um, but that's my personal hang up. We won't let that onto it. And I was driving my old shitty, you know, Jeep with its cow catcher on the front end. It's a winch that I had the roof off of it. And this was before check engine lights too, by the way. For those who, if it had, this thing was from, God, late 70s. This Jeep was. It was amazing. Love that Jeep. I don't know where the hell it is now. I wish I still had it. But it literally just stopped in the middle of the road. All the power like got sucked right out of it. And it stopped and just started rolling. The lights went out on, the headlights went out on, and just rolled to a dead stop in the middle of the road. Um, at first, I was like, what the fuck? Not out here, not now. Um, and I was sitting there thinking, because of course I didn't have a cell phone. Back in, cell phones hadn't, were just becoming a thing then. Um, and of course I didn't have one. And there was no one anywhere close to me nearby. And believe it or not, deserts and these lonely tracts of land are not quiet. There's usually life out there that you can hear. You can hear coyotes, you can hear owls, you can hear insects and out there. But when my Jeep died, there was nothing. The silence was so loud and intense, it pressed up against me. Like these big, like huge walls, plastic walls pushing up against your face and your head and your ears and all of your body. This pressure that would build up around you, this silence was. And then I looked ahead on the road. I caught the glimpse of something. Of course, I'm thinking it's a rattlesnake out on the road, because at night you would usually find rattlesnakes and king snakes and like that out there. They would be on the road at night. And bull snakes. Oh God, bull snakes. I love bull snakes, but they get huge. But they go out and soak up the heat on the road at night. And I thought maybe it was a rattlesnake or a bull snake or a king snake I saw up on the edge of the road. So of course I stood up in the Jeep and was over there and looking, of course, to see if I could get a good look at it. Because if it wasn't a rattlesnake, I'd go investigate it. But if it was a rattlesnake, fuck that. I wasn't going to go look. And I saw something. It looked like a snake. But it looked like a snake made of shadows. A snake that was a shadow within a shadow. If a shadow gave birth to something that was alive, if night gave birth to something that was alive, it was this shadow. Yeah, you don't fuck around at night. But if night could give birth to something, it would be this shadow. And it stopped. It was thrashing in the road. Big, huge. Um, it was about half the thickness of a telephone pole. And it was about 8 feet long. It had a tempered end on one of its tails. Oh, I'm saying tails because the damn thing had more than one tail. Yeah. But it didn't branch off into separate tails. It's like where the tail was at. The very tip of the tail had split. Each one was moving independently on its ass end. And then it stopped because I said out loud, "What the fuck?" And then when it stopped, when I said that, and I could feel something looking at me. At night, if you're ever in the woods late at night, and when the crickets stop, there's something in the woods. Something in the woods that made the cricket stop chirping. And whatever it is can see you, but you can't see it. That was the exact same feeling that I had with this thing. And then I was following its body because it stopped up to where its head should be standing, squinting, because it was about 12 feet away from the front end of my Jeep. And I heard something giggle. And I heard and whisper, "Silly." And I went, and what the fuck was that? What the actual fuck? And then I heard it say silly again. And then it said man. Silly man. And as I looked, the front end of it raised up, turned around, and the only thing I saw on the front where his head should be at were these two yellow orbs looking at me. And the first thing I remembered was the story of when the Naagloshii fall. They were one of the marks of their fall was that they developed yellow eyes, and that their children, their scions, every generation was born with yellow eyes, instead of the traditional silver, which marked the purity and the divinity of them. And I just stood there like that, and then I heard it giggle again. And literally, I know this is going to sound lame as fuck. It went from, if you've ever quickly flattened a tire, it goes from being fully full to completely flat like that. That's what happened to this thing. It's I can see it swelling a little bit and a little bit, and then it just dropped and just deflated and just vanished in the shadows after that. That scared the fuck out of me. What scared me even more was my fucking truck turned back, my fucking Jeep turned back on immediately without me turning the key, the ignition. The son of a bitch turned back on. And I had the key in the ignition, and no, I didn't turn it. The motherfucker turned itself on. And the headlights turned on. And when the headlights turned on, there was absolutely nothing there in front of me. And I was wondering, I was thinking back on part of the stories that were told, the story that was told to me of the origin of these things, these mortal creatures with a tiny spark of the divine left within them. Um, when they are born nowadays in a tribe. The tribe, because they're scared of them, the tribe is deathly afraid of them because these are dangerous things. The tribe is completely dangerous things. I wasn't smart enough to run with a lot of shit back then. And I'm too feeble to run nowadays, so I'm pretty fucked if anything wants to come get me now. That's an invitation to get me. I don't know what's watching this tonight. That when a Skinwalker is born now, it's not kicked out of the tribe, but it's not welcomed by the tribe anymore. They are something to be ashamed of now by the tribesmen. They're ashamed of it now that it's there, and that it came from them. It's great evil came from them. Um, and usually the Skinwalker, when it does grow up fast and when it gets old enough, it goes out and it lives on its own, and it only returns back to the tribe when it's in need of something. But most encounters that are done with a Skinwalker now is one that is living off by itself out in the mountains, forests, deserts. They can't. Two Skinwalkers can't have a kid. It has between something semi-divine and divine, semi-divine, or mortal. Because only mortals are allowed to give birth, or only gifted with the ability to give birth, or to procreate. Let me rephrase that. Procreate, um, because a skinwalker could assume the form, approximate the form of a female, and become pregnant. But a male would have to provide his spark of life, his seed, for that skinwalker to become impregnated. But it has to always involve a mortal, somebody who is a pure, straight up mortal, without any Skin-Walker or Naagloshii work into it. Now, these things that live out there, these skinwalkers that live out there in the wilds now, they've they were already insane when they were born. The insanity, the curse, their insanity with them when they were born. But it got worse. And again, when somebody sees them or they're being harassed, our skinwalker goes forth to harass a human being. Um, Again, it goes back to the fact that they're envious of their state versus the state of that mortal, and wish to cause nothing but harm or ill upon the person. Personally, um, again, you have. Oh, let me pause for a second and talk about Skin-Walker Ranch. Um, People always ask me about Skin-Walker Ranch when I think about it. And boy, do I have stories about that place up in the Superstition Mountains. It used to not always be, a place that was treated like Fort Knox that you weren't allowed to go into it. You could go there if you want to, but again, that's a story for another day. But I just wanted to say this one thing about, because everybody talks about Skin-Walker Ranch and talks about the Skinwalkers being around it. I think the people who own Skin-Walker Ranch are full of shit. Um, they're using the fame and the mystique of Skin-Walker Ranch to enrich themselves both in fame and with money. And I'm going to say this before I finish it up. There was an episode of South Park where Eric Cartman got $1 million when this bought a fun park. He bought a fun park so he could ride all the rides by himself. It'd be all his. No one would be allowed to come there and ride on the shit. Well, his park, long story short, his park became super famous and he became even richer, much to his chagrin when you see the episode. When he told people that they weren't allowed to come there, it made people want to come there even more. And that's what I believe Skin-Walker Ranch is. It's the Eric Cartman supernatural community. They tell me, "Oh, you're not allowed to come here. It's closed off. You're not allowed to come here." Um, Makes you want to go there even more. And I haven't met a paranormal investigator or a cryptid hunter to date that has not wanted to spend time on Skin-Walker Ranch. It's because of that mystique that they've put out about, they exude about Skin-Walker Ranch that makes people want to go out there and do that. That's why I say they're full of shit. You have to go check out that episode and you'd understand what I'm talking about. But that's my theory about Skin-Walker Ranch. I'm pretty sure I'm going to get some men in black here to knock on my door at some point this week to explain to me why I'm full of shit, but that's what I believe. I'll pause now. Does anybody have any questions? All right, guys. I hope you were all entertained by. I hope I was able to explain myself well tonight and entertain you a little bit and tell you a fun story about the Naagloshii and the Skin-Walker, their origins, their true origins. Um, Obviously, the crystal is bullshit too. I mean, with modern technology, the shit that we have today, you could dig that whole fucking island up, okay? In less than a year, that island dug straight down to hell and back by now. So again, that's another Cartman thing. All about the enrichment of people that's involved. Okay, guys, I had a lot of fun talking with everybody tonight. I have another episode, of course, lined up that if you feel free to come listen and watch. Um, Please hit subscribe, like, or dislike. If you liked it, awesome. If you disliked it, leave some information in the comments about how you'd like to see me improvement. You can check me out on Twitter at VoodooMan3, um, or Voodoo3, or, look up my Naked Bigfoot on Twitter, and I'm there. You can drop me a DM if you have any questions or any concerns about my episodes or have any suggestions about future episodes. So, everybody have a great night, and until we meet